I've got to just keep going, because I always got it in my mind that I'm somehow going to do something snappy and clever. But I feel like I just need to really just keep trying to bring up, trying to give voice to whatever it is that's in my heart that wants to be said. So I wanted to say that wisdom in service of itself is futility. So all of this heritage that I carry, in my body, in my mind, in my soul, that's mine to do what I will with, I bring it to Jesus. I bring it to the cross. And I acknowledge that there's no other way. That the whole of this old world is infected with sin, with evil. That it's in there and there's no escaping it. No matter how good you try to be, it's just there. And it just has to be destroyed. And you kind of know it, I guess, maybe in your spirit, you know it, and that's why you're kind of scared. So you just got to disconnect every part of you that's still connected into that old world. You've got to let God deal with it. Cry out to Jesus for salvation. And He hears, He hears. This has been such a long journey for me. But I took out Neil's painting today. I put it in the shed because I don't know what else to do with it. It's not that I don't like the painting, but the painting's never really been my painting or special to me. But it was something I had that had value in this world. And that's kind of spoke to a sense that I belong to something that was worthy of esteem. But as I've been pondering it, I've sort of been shocked with the realization that evil goes on in lots of different little forms all over life, and it just speckles it. It's sprinkled all over. The tissue. Evil is speckled. then we kind of step around it and we kind of try to explain it away, or try to distance ourselves from it, or try to justify it. And then sometimes people are just like suddenly caught in it and doing things that are not right. When you go into something like a world like the Bohemian artist world, and there's this kind of understanding that you don't really have boundaries anyway. So who's to say what's right or wrong? So Neil, who was the artist who did this painting, he was an alternative guy. He had long hair, big long beard. He was sort of the start of this new kind of arty alternative culture in Australia. He had come from a traditional English family and had sort of at some point got caught up, I think, with the Boyds, and that he was involved with the Boyds pottery, and he used to do drawings, create art for the, he was part of the pottery anyway. I've got a plate there somewhere from him that he did on one of the Boyd's pottery pieces. So he's always been a figure of admiration. He's a kind of a thinker. He's a conservationist. He's been given accolades in regard to what he's done in conserving the different areas of bushland, and been ahead of his time in keeping like domesticated animals out of that space, making it like he made something at the Bend of the Isles, I don't know. But my mum, when she got religious, she kind of cut off from all these people. So they're kind of there in the background of my life, but they're not very present through a lot of my growing up. So it's more like I remember Neil when I was young, and I remember his gardens. That was a big part of what I remember of he was an amazing gardener, and he'd make these amazing garden spaces that would just have such a lot of atmosphere and beauty. But over the course of my adult life, my later adult life, talking to my dad and my mum, then later, Dad at one time said something about how Neil he liked little girls a bit too much, or something like that. And it was all done sort of like in a time before it was really such a big thing to things like that, like the idea that a man would like little girls a bit too much is all kind of like, funny guys, or what's all that about. So it wasn't given the you sort of going, what? Oh, it must have been, and then it was like, Dad said, oh no, he liked to bath little girls. I was like, oh, okay. And so you're trying to understand it in the sense of, artistic people, they love beauty, so you're sort of thinking, well, children are beautiful, and it is beautiful to bath them. They are beautiful. So you're sort of hoping that's what it means. And so it's sort of like piece by piece in a long journey, you're sort of putting together the picture that it wasn't quite as simple as that. And when I was talking to Mum yesterday, it was all coming back because I can't remember how we started talking about it. Maybe I brought it up because it was on my mind, but trying to say, what exactly was it with Neil? What do you remember? Because by the end I was able to get from Dad the idea that there was some little girl that used to hang around there and had this kind of special relationship with Neil, and that her parents were somehow complicit. They knew him and that they allowed this relationship or something. And and in my mind, I don't know if I made it up, but like as if they were admirers of Neil. And so the idea is that like Neil would feel, I guess, maybe a bit like the Uberman, the idea, is it Nietzsche, of the man that's above normal morality. I think it's like that. And it's like, so there's this trap when we're using ourselves as the guide for what's right and wrong, that especially with things where there's desire involved and things like sexual pleasure, that you lose your ability to discern right and wrong because there's no way to have anything solid to stand on if yourself is your what you're standing on, because yourself is going to be so caught up in your desire and your pleasure realm, and pleasures, and particularly sexual pleasure or food pleasure, has in it somehow a weightiness of rightness. It feels right. If something feels pleasurable or desirable, we feel like it's right, I think. And so that's why if you don't have anything external to yourself that you have to check yourself against, except maybe some abstract idea of truth or something, then I think you just can't see, because you get blinded by your desires. So Neil wasn't, he was a kind of a good man in a sense, like he was trying to do right and trying to do good, and he's always like philosophical and thinking things through and trying to figure out what's best for people and being wise, and clearly, I reckon, wanting to help people, wanting to do good for them and look after people. But then underneath it all is this story of, as with Mum talking about it, that he had a wife, Vivian, and she used to go off to work in the morning, and he would go off painting, or he'd be sitting around the fire having cups of tea. But Mum said this little girl would come over, and Neil would take her to bed with him during the day. And it's almost like it's not until she's saying it out loud that she's kind of going, oh, I wonder what that was all about. And she said something like, she said it was, because I said, well, there were the other girls, or, and she said, oh, no, it wasn't like a thing. It was just this relationship. Like, she said it was just natural. It was just a natural thing. They just, and I think in her mind, and maybe that naive mindset from that era, and maybe in this world particularly, there was this sort of feeling of like things just have a natural momentum and they just are what they are, and you just accept them, and so that maybe saw it in that light of like that Neil and this little girl just had some sort of special bond, and it just had to express itself, or I don't know. But it wasn't until she was talking about it, she's going, yeah, I don't know. She said, I don't know what they did in bed. She said they couldn't have had intercourse because she was too young. I know Neil later in his life was holed up in Nil and trying to, I think, maybe escape some of the retribution that was coming after him. So I think it's clear that it was a propensity, it wasn't a relationship that, you know, obviously, even if it was a relationship, that was evil. But it was a propensity, so I think he had an appetite, an unnatural, unhealthy appetite for children, and that they somehow coexisted with this person who was like a model to a lot of people, like a hero type person. But I have it in my mind that because his second wife, Abigail, had a daughter who was my age, I think. And I'm pretty sure that she's maybe one of the ones trying to go after him in her adulthood, trying to get some justice. I have that as an association, and then it's sort of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, was that going on? And that my ex-husband spent a bit of time with Neil, and he was coming up to 90 or around 90, but not long before he died, and he spent a bit of time talking to him and interviewing him. And I think Neil was kind of maybe wrestling around with this whole issue and trying to understand it. Probably, like I said, I think when you get caught in these things, it's a trap, and you don't. Some part of you is justifying it and feeling that's okay, and that apparently he'd maybe early on in this coming into his life, he'd had a friend. This is the story I remember that I heard from Tim. And I'd have to talk to Tim again to see if he says I've got it accurate, but my memory of it is that, yeah, Neil was trying to wrestling around with it in his old age, and obviously he'd had to hide away, and people coming after him, and he'd sort of say something like, oh, you know, Janie wouldn't let me, you know, didn't want her girls to be at my place because she said I was a sex maniac or something, and it was almost like a sort of naive attitude or understanding of, I don't know, he was like obviously wrestling around with it in his old age. But Tim said he told a story about a woman friend of his talking about when she was 10 years old, that her father had taken her out on a like fishing trip or something, camping, or I just got it in my head, in a field, I don't know, out in the bush or something, and with with friends of his, and that they all used her sexually, and just so hard to talk about these things. They're just so beyond that they really happen. I don't know, so wrong. But she apparently, so she got, like, obviously she'd gone into her adulthood, taking that into herself as being what she wanted, and saying that, and like, so reassuring him that it hadn't done her any harm, and that somehow this was behind his justification for allowing it to exist in his life. I think that's all I want to say today. I know it's not finished, but I think that's all I want to say today.